The Where Our Minds Wander podcast may contain sensitive content and explicit language. Listener discretion is advised. Greetings, fellow wanderers, to the places our minds wander.
The house at the end of the dirt road, where disembodied voices whisper and strange sounds make the living shiver.
Where shadows lurk at the edge of the woods, just outside your back door. And mysterious lights speed beyond reason across the clear night sky.
Odd events throughout time that lead you down the rabbit hole.
I'm Wes.
And I'm Beth.
And this is Where Our Minds Wander. Hello and welcome to Where Our Minds Wander, all you fellow wanderers. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, everybody.
Well, we have an excellent episode lined up for you all tonight.
We do.
But I gotta say that you're gonna have to bear with us because Beth has a little bit of a sniffle and perhaps a cold coming on. And I'm not feeling the best either.
It's been quite a week.
I know. I went to the ER with some right lower back pain. Thought it might be a kidney stone or perhaps I had pulled something. But come to find out, I have shingles.
Which is one of the worst sounding things.
Oh, yes. But to make it even better, not only do I have shingles, but I also have 2 kidney stones on top of that.
Yes.
So with that said, we're going to forego any housekeeping tonight and get right into our episode. So sit back, get comfy, and I'll try to do the same. And let's get into Beth's story.
And if you hear any pained groaning while I'm telling my story, it's not because Wes doesn't like what I'm saying.
No, it's because I'm having a hard time sitting here in one spot for too long. For those of you that have had shingles out there, you can probably relate. And for those that haven't, it's ungodly painful and itchy.
Sorry, honey.
I know. So, come on. Make me forget about all this stuff.
I'm going to get going.
Let's get into it.
The story of Laurel Hall and Laurel Glen Cemetery is so interesting that it's kind of hard to know where to start. With the hauntings, the unique Bowman Family mausoleum, or the reason why the mansion was even built. I usually like to start at the beginning, but since all of those things, the ghosts, the mausoleum, the mansion, they're all tied together, so it's hard to know where the beginning actually is. But at the heart of it all is a true love story, where one man hoped to reconnect with his beloved family in the afterlife, and who did everything he could to make sure that that happened. But in some ways, it's hard to know what's true and what is local lore, since at least one former caretaker of the mansion was known to embellish stories just to entertain visitors, and as a way to deter vandals. As always, I will try to do my best. Cuttingsville, Vermont is a small rural community within the town of Shrewsbury. The population in 2023 was approximately 1,287 people. So when people drive along Route 103, they might notice the white Victorian mansion just because it sits across the street from the beautiful Laurel Glen Cemetery. Now, Laurel Glen would look like any typical rural Vermont cemetery if it weren't for the Bowman Family mausoleum, a truly unique mausoleum. Made of 750 tons of granite, 50 tons of marble, 20,000 bricks, 535 barrels of plaster, and 100 wagon loads of sand, It took over 125 skilled laborers, masons, and stonecutters to construct from 1880 to 1881. According to the Shrewsbury Historical Society, the Grecian-style mausoleum itself was designed by New York City architect G.B. Croft, but it was Italian-American artist Giovanni Turini who sculpted the three members of the Bowman family. There are two marble busts, one of Mrs. Jenny Bowman, one of 23-year-old Ella Bowman, and a full-body sculpture of infant Addie Bowman. It was Turini's son, John, who sculpted the full, life-size marble likeness of Mr. Bowman, ascending the mausoleum steps. The Shrewsbury Historical Society describes the marble statue as, quote, bent with grief and burdened with mourning cloak, silk hat, gloves, a huge funeral wreath, and a key. He is represented in the act of ascending the steps of the tomb. In all, it cost Mr. Bowman $75,000 to build, which in today's money would be almost $3 million. So, how did the son of a farmer living in rural Cuttingsville afford such a mausoleum? And why did he build such a gorgeous mansion directly across the street from the family tomb? Well, because he was John P. Bowman, and he was heartbroken. John Bowman was born in 1816 in Clarendon, Vermont. At age 15, he got a job in a tannery in Rutland, and after learning all that he could, he moved to New York State, where he worked in tanning factories. As a young man, he returned to Vermont and settled in Shrewsbury, where he opened his own tanning and currying business. But he also sold boots and shoes. In 1849, he married Jenny Gates from Warren, New York. The Shrewsbury Historical Society describes Jenny as being dignified, graceful, self-reliant, courteous, generous, and thoughtful. The couple were married for just 3 years when Bowman was elected to the Vermont state legislature. Bowman quickly realized that politics weren't really for him, and by 1852 he and Jenny had left Vermont and moved to Stony Creek, New York, where he opened yet another tannery. Their first child, a daughter they named Addie, was born in 1856, but the child passed away at just 4 months old. A second child, another daughter, was born in 1860. The Bowmans named her Ella. Bowman was an incredibly successful businessman, and during the Civil War, he sold his leather goods primarily to the government, so this made him very wealthy. But in 1879, the Bowmans' beloved daughter Ella passed away from an illness at the age of just 23. 6 months later, Jenny Bowman died as well. John Bowman, at age 63, had lost his entire family. Bereft, he decided to return home to Vermont and build them a beautiful mausoleum. He bought a piece of land near the Cuttingsville burial ground and commissioned the building. According to the Vermonter.com, in 1881, once the mausoleum was finished, complete with his grieving likeness forever sculpted in marble ascending the steps, Bowman arranged to have Jenny, Ella, and Addie's remains brought to the mausoleum. In his book describing the mausoleum, architect G.B. Croft described it, saying, quote, "A most pathetic family history wrought in stone. Laurel Glen Mausoleum will stand for centuries and prove a laurel wreath a crown of glory to perpetuate the well-rounded, honorable, successful life and name of its most notable founder. Bowman also commissioned a greenhouse to be built nearby. He had the grounds graded, added retaining walls, 3 gates, shade trees, benches, arranged grass plots, and filled walkways in with crushed stone, basically creating Laurel Glen Cemetery. It was so beautiful and so well maintained that people came from all over to drive their buggies through and stop for picnics. And then Bowman commissioned the building of a great Victorian mansion directly across the street. He hired G.B. Croft one more time to build his mansion. He had a magnificent fountain in the front yard, which the Rutland Herald described in 1882 as having a, quote, water nymph mid sweet accessories, with laughing sprays of water singing amid the trees and flowers, their songs of parting salutation to their homes high in the mountainside, and lulling one to sleep and pleasant dreams, in hammock swung beneath the shadows of the spacious covered gallery nearby. The mansion itself was a mixture of Elizabethan and Queen Anne styles that I won't even try to describe on my own. Instead, I'll read you this excerpt from the October 31st issue of the Rutland Daily Herald. Quote, Laurel Hall's style is a fresh, bold treatment of Elizabethan and Queen Anne details. An open terrace on the north blends into a covered gallery on the main facade, approached at the entrance by a broad, inviting flight of swelling steps, with buttresses of curvilinear form, with paneled newels capped with rich bronze urns filled with foliage plants and blooming flowers. Over the entrance rises, through the roof, a tower, with pyramidal termination and spacious balconies at each floor, with shadowy canopies and gables here and there, of heights and inclination varied, given greater character still by several massive chimney stacks with heavy molded hoods that rise above them all, and stand like sentinels defined in bold relief against the sky. That was a mouthful even for me.
Yeah, it was a little bit too much. I think they could have described it in more of a basic way.
Not in 1882 or whatever year it was.
Yeah.
But inside, the mansion was even more spectacular. To begin, a pair of life-sized female statues holding bronze candelabras over their heads flank either side of the main staircase. At the landing, there are 2 stained glass windows. The parlor, music room, and formal dining room all had elaborate wallpaper. Bowman's meditation room was in the tower and looked directly over the mausoleum. Many of the other walls are covered in murals, some depicting scenes from Shakespeare. The house had both hot and cold running water in 1881, as well as porcelain-lined sinks and closet baths, otherwise known as indoor flushing toilets. Outside, Bowman also added a stable, ice house, carriage barn, and that fountain that I mentioned earlier. Oh, and I don't think I mentioned this earlier. Laurel Hall was meant to be Bowman's summer home. He retired there full-time in 1888, and he passed away there in 1891. But off and on, for almost a decade, John Bowman lived in his mansion alone, overlooking his marble likeness entering the family tomb across the street. Now, that's not to say that Bowman was a recluse. Not at all. He was known to invite quite a few guests to his mansion, and he enjoyed entertaining. But still, it's a little sad. And it gets a little more strange. Something else that I haven't mentioned is that Bowman believed pretty strongly in reincarnation, among other things. When he passed, he'd left a $50,000 fund to keep the mansion ready for when he and his family could re-inhabit it. Amazingly, that $50,000 lasted until 1953. But here's what Bowman wanted. He wanted a caretaker or a custodian of the property to keep it all in, quote, waiting readiness, which meant keeping the clocks wound, a fire in the fireplace, lights on at nighttime, and a hot meal prepared and left on the dining room table for him, Jenny, and Ella every single evening. One can assume then that while he was living, he also did these things every single night. And since he assumed that they would all one day be emerging from the mausoleum, I should describe it in a little more detail. According to uvm.edu, the mausoleum is built entirely out of smooth-faced granite, with laurel leaves carved all along the top. There is a double staircase to the entrance, decorated with 4 stone urns and 2 boot scrapers. And, as I mentioned a few times already, the marble statue of Bowman stands on the stairs, his marble body racked with grief, his face peering into the mausoleum as though he is longing to see his family one more time. Once you cross the threshold through a very large bronze door, the inside is completely marble, divided into 2 sections. In the back are the 4 vaults, with a couch of dreamless sleep carved into the lintel above them. There are several copper candelabras, and there are also several large mirrors, which create the illusion of an even bigger space. In the front half are 3 pedestals. 2 hold the busts of Jenny and Ella. Between them, closer to the floor, is the 3rd low pedestal, which holds a full-body statue of an upright sitting infant, meant to be Addie, which is a little strange since she was only 4 months old when she passed away, so she wouldn't have been sitting up by herself. But there's also a 4th bust of John Bowman, separated from the rest as if he's still looking in on them. A wooden writing stand is also there. It once held a guest book for visitors to sign. So, the mausoleum came first, then the luxurious mansion across the street. Also, John Bowman could create the perfect place for his entire family to be reincarnated and come back together someday. But what if they stayed together in the afterlife instead, to haunt the mausoleum and the house? For many decades, up until 1953, there were always caretakers at the mansion, as per Bowman's wishes. According to a New York Times article, once the money ran out, it became necessary to auction off all the furniture and rent the house out in order to pay taxes. Shortly before the auction, an 8-year-old girl was in the house with her family. For whatever reason, as she passed a portrait of Jenny, she stuck her tongue out at it. Several witnesses saw the portrait come flying off the wall and almost hit the kid. One of the earliest tenants was a man from Connecticut named William Snow. His wife Maud and daughter Mildred both had weird experiences. Maud woke up one night and saw a woman standing at the end of their bed. She felt instinctively that it was Jenny Bowman. Mildred had the terrifying experience of being kept awake one night by the sound of a baby crying over and over. Although Mr. Stone said he didn't believe any of it, they didn't stay for very long. And the funny thing about the baby crying, a lot of the articles pointed this out, there was never any children who lived in the house up until 1953. So they were the earliest tenants of the house, but there'd never been any children in the house before them. So it's odd to be hearing a baby crying. There were also the motorists in 1974 who broke down outside the mansion one night. As they used flashlights to try and repair the car, one of them noticed a light on inside the house. They decided to go knock on the door and ask for help, but nobody answered. When they walked back to the car, the single light inside the house disappeared. They were at the front of the car working on it when they both heard heavy breathing suddenly beside them. Then the trunk of the car opened all by itself and then slammed shut. Then, one by one, all 4 doors opened on their own and slammed shut. As the 2 motorists backed away from their car in total alarm, the hood came down on its own as well. Seeing a light in the upstairs window of the mansion has been a common occurrence ever since, as well as shadowy figures seen moving past the windows. People are so convinced sometimes that there's somebody in the house that they've called the police, but they've never found any evidence of any intruders. Today, the cemetery is open year-round, and the house is a museum and is open for tours during the spring, summer, and early fall. A small group of volunteers keep the place running, and there's a small board of trustees. One of those trustees, Tom Giffen, told WCAX in 2021 that he didn't feel spooked out in the house at all until one specific instance. He and another board member were talking about what they'd been doing to keep the place open for visitors as they walked through the servants' quarters. Giffen had said, quote, "I wonder what Mr. Bowman would think of what we're doing." All of a sudden, a radio sitting on the windowsill turned on by itself. Giffen said they left pretty quickly after that. The overall feeling is that John, Jenny, and Ella are in the house. So not quite reincarnated, but perhaps haunting it together, which would be really sad, since Bowman did so much to try and make their reincarnation happen. Or maybe their spirits do think that they are living again, which would explain some of their ghostly behavior. And before we take a break for a couple minutes, I just wanted to add that in all of the research that I was doing, it said that Bowman believed very strongly in reincarnation, but it also seemed like he thought that the entire family was going to emerge from the mausoleum. So I found that a little confusing, but I just wanted to address that in case some of you picked up on that too, that I had said reincarnated, but more like they would come back to life, more like reanimated. So, just wanted to put that out there.
And we'll return after this quick break.
Hey, did you know? In the early 1800s, President Thomas Jefferson was out riding when he came across a fellow rider heading the same direction. The two men struck up a conversation in which the stranger, who obviously had no idea who his companion was, went on and on about everything wrong with our government and the president's policies. Jefferson remained quite quiet and let the man rant. As they approached home, Jefferson politely asked the man to join him for some refreshments, which at this point the man finally thought to ask the president his name. "Thomas Jefferson," he calmly replied. The man calmly replied, "My name is Haynes," before turning his horse around and galloping away as fast as he could go. The saying became instantly popular for decades to come. So the next time you need to make a hasty departure because you put your foot in your mouth, you could always try it. Although it might work better if you have a horse to gallop away on. Who'da thunk it?
All right, we're back from the break. And last week, Beth had a UFO story for everyone. And tonight, I have an alien encounter story that is so unique that I think you're all really going to like it. It's one that we had never heard of before, and it definitely has some interesting elements. It took place at the northern edge of Medicine Bow National Forest in Wyoming in October of 1974. Carl Higdon was 40 years old and had an unexpected Friday off from his job as an oil driller on October 25th. He decided that he'd spend the day hunting elk, so he put his brand new 7mm Magnum rifle in his pickup truck and headed out alone from his house in Rawlings. His wife Marjorie stayed behind at home. Now, Carl wasn't in poor health, but he did have several kidney stones, and he also had some lung scarring from contracting TB when he was younger. I wouldn't mention that at all, except it does come into play later. According to thinkanomalous.com, he thought he would try his luck in McCarty Canyon, which was about 40 miles away. On his way south, he noticed a pickup pulled over on the side of the road, and he pulled over too, to see if he could help. It just happened to be two other fellow hunters, and they told him that he'd probably have better luck in Medicine Bow National Forest. Medicine Bow National Forest has grasslands and 140 named mountains, the highest of which is Medicine Bow Peak, which is just over 12,000 feet in elevation. There's foxes, moose, black bears, mountain lions, and a rather large elk population. He drove to the northern edge of the forest, parked his truck on a hill, grabbed his gun, and talked to the game warden for a few minutes. At about 4 p.m., he walked through the snowy woods for barely a mile before he came to a wide clearing, blanketed in snow. It was all pretty normal, but not for long. In fact, the strangeness began as soon as he entered the clearing. First, he noticed 5 elk standing perfectly motionless about 100 yards away. He was probably thinking about how lucky he was when he raised the rifle and aimed at the largest male. But when he pulled the trigger, there was absolutely no sound. The bullet seemed to travel in slow motion, and when it actually traveled about 50 feet, it was as if it hit some sort of invisible wall and then just dropped harmlessly down into the snow. It didn't bounce, it just stopped and fell. The elk didn't even react. They just stood there, motionless. Confused, Carl stepped forward without any problem and walked to the spot where the bullet had fallen. He picked it up and put it in his pocket. And that's when he noticed a small transparent box on the ground that he determined was about 7 feet long, 5 feet wide, and 5 feet tall. Now, you know that feeling that you get when you know someone is watching you? Well, Carl suddenly had that feeling, and when he turned around, he saw someone. But it was the strangest looking human that he had ever seen. According to timefordisclosure.com, the figure was tall, about 6 feet 2, and thin, about 180 pounds, and it was dressed from head to toe in some sort of black skin-tight suit, almost like something a scuba diver wears. Now remember, it was a snowy October in the middle of the national forest. The figure also wore 2 seatbelts crisscrossed across its chest, and a metal belt around its waist with a yellow star where the buckle should be. If the outfit wasn't strange enough, its body was also a bit odd too. First, its arms were very long, and one of them ended in a chisel-like appendage rather than a hand. The other arm, well, it had no hand at all. And the entity's head, well, it was even weirder. First, he didn't appear to have any sort of neck. Its head seemed to sit directly on its shoulders. His hair was straw-like and stood straight up, like the bristles of a broom, which isn't all that odd, I guess, except he also didn't have any ears. His eyes were too small to be human and deep set into his face. He didn't appear to have a chin or any sort of jawline, and his mouth was just a slit, but with 3 large, visible teeth. Now, if that's not strange enough, the creature had 2 short antennae coming out of its forehead. Yep.
I was going to say, it doesn't even sound like a classic gray, but when you add in, see, I was thrown by the chisel hand. When you add in the antenna on top of its forehead, it's even less like a gray.
It seems more like a cartoon character.
I know.
This entity or alien was wearing black boots, but its feet weren't touching the ground at all. It was simply hovering. And then it began to move, floating closer to Carl. When it was only a few feet away, it spoke to Carl, but its mouth didn't move. It said hello in English. Carl, a little dazed, said, "Hey back." Then the entity asked, "Are you hungry?" It didn't wait for an answer. It just pulled out a plastic bag, which then floated through the air. Carl held out his hand and grabbed it from the air. He opened it up and was a little confused by what was inside.
Was it pancakes?
No, it wasn't pancakes.
If you're wondering why I'm asking, it's because we did a show about another alien encounter and a man named Joseph Simonton who claimed that 3 aliens made him pancakes.
That he did. But no, it wasn't pancakes, and I bet you he probably would have been hungry for some at this point.
Possibly.
I would have took pancakes from the alien. Now, there was nothing in the bag except 4 pills. And apparently Carl was the type of guy who never took any pills for anything. But he felt compelled or controlled somehow. So he put his hand in the bag, took out a pill, and swallowed it, as the alien promised it would make him feel full for an entire day.
Wow.
Once he had swallowed the pill, the alien introduced himself, saying his name was Ausso One. Then he politely asked Carl if he'd like to go with him. Carl politely responded, "Well, I might as well."
I love it.
Later, Carl insisted that it was his choice to go with the alien. He had always said that if he had ever met one and it invited him on board its spaceship, that he'd go. The next thing that Carl remembered was that Ausso One lifted his chisel hand and pointed at him. Even though the small transparent cube didn't seem to have any doors or openings, and Ausso One was much too tall to stand upright inside it, Carl suddenly found them both inside of it. He later described it as being as though the small cube was resting inside a much larger transparent ship, and he was sitting in a sort of bucket seat with his arms and head in restraints. But they appeared to be some sort of ribbons. Still, he panicked a little, especially when he saw 3 other beings who looked identical to Ausso One. When he was able to calm down, he looked around a bit, or as much as he could in his ribbon restraints, and he immediately noticed 5 elk that seemed to be frozen still. Now, some sites say that they were floating in the air, while others say that they were in some sort of cage. But either way, they seemed to be motionless, and Carl assumed that they were the 5 elk from the clearing. Carl said, "You got my elk." And Ausso One, or the other 3 entities that looked exactly like him, just shrugged. Next, one of the aliens came towards him with a helmet that had 6 wires sticking out of it in all directions, and pulled it over Carl's head, fastening the strap under his chin.
How could he do that with no hands, with his chisel hand and his non-hand?
Well, I don't know. Somehow they figured out how to do it. Through its visors and the cube's transparent walls, Carl could tell that they were rising up from the ground. Pretty soon, he saw his pickup truck far, far below them, until one of the beings waved his arm and the truck vanished. They rose higher and higher. Soon, they left Earth's orbit. The aliens told him that they were going home to their planet, just 163,000 light years away.
A short jaunt.
Not too far.
No.
As they approached the distant planet's surface, Carl could see a huge tower that he said reminded him of the Space Needle in Seattle, but it was surrounded by rotating searchlights, so bright that Carl had to close his eyes to stop them from burning. When he opened them again, he saw a group of humans standing outside the ship, around the base of the tower, which made no sense to him whatsoever, since they looked like they were completely at ease. There were adults and children, and they were just milling around as if it was the most ordinary thing in the world. One of the aliens explained it away by saying that they visited Earth often and usually brought back humans every time. According to thinkanomalous.com, the next thing Carl remembered was floating down a long corridor with an alien on either side of him. A door slid up to reveal a large room with nothing in it except a 4x8 foot shield or wall. The wall dropped down in front of him and then rose back up as if it was some sort of scanning device. Now, I can almost imagine one of the aliens shaking its head in disappointment as it said, quote, "You're not what we want. We'll take you back." Carl was floated back into the cube with Ausso One, who explained to him that his race had been coming to Earth for years for the fish and other animals that they turned into food pills. Each pill could keep an alien full for 4 days. They couldn't find any food on their own planet because their oceans had turned yellow. He also claimed that the 9 planets of our solar system gave them some sort of magnetic power, and that their black suits protected them from our sun. Ausso One also told Carl that he was intrigued by his primitive weapon, and that he'd very much like to keep it, but he wasn't allowed to. So he just took his packet of remaining pills back from him. And then, just like that, they were back in Medicine Bow National Forest. And then poor Carl was basically dumped out of the cube. He actually slipped on a rock and fell, and rolled down a hill, injuring his shoulder. Ausso One and his spaceship were gone. Carl Higdon had no idea where he was. He certainly wasn't in the clearing from before, and his truck was nowhere in sight. Eventually, Carl did find his truck in a canyon, a full 5 miles from where he had left it, but he was so disoriented that he didn't even realize it was his truck. He couldn't figure out where the voices were coming from, until eventually his senses returned and he realized it was his CB radio. He picked it up and told the voice he needed help. The voice just happened to belong to his boss, who had been frantically trying to find him. Except Carl couldn't remember his own name. He just kept repeating that he was very cold. When his boss, Roy Fleming, asked him where he was, meaning his location, Carl replied that he was in a truck with a funny stick in the middle. He had been driving stick shift his entire life, but he just couldn't remember what it was or what it was called. Now, Fleming and several other people, including Carl's wife Marjorie and police officers, had been looking for Carl for hours. Marjorie was in another pickup truck with her friend and her friend's husband. At one point, all three of them watched a strange pulsating light in the sky for a full 20 minutes. When Carl was found at 11:40 p.m., he was in his truck, which was stuck in the mud, but there were no tire tracks whatsoever. It was as if his truck had just been placed in the center. Carl didn't recognize Marjorie at all and asked her why everyone kept calling him Carl, before lapsing into an eerie sing-song voice, repeating the same phrase over and over. "They took my elk. They took my elk." At one point, he urged everyone to check the bullet in his pocket, but everyone, especially Marjorie, was more concerned with getting him to the hospital. At Carbon County Hospital, it was determined that Carl had no drugs in his system. They also determined that both his kidney stones and the scarring from his TB were completely gone. Even though he still didn't know who he was or why people kept calling him Carl, he was able to recall some details about his encounter. Marjorie gave him some paper and asked him to draw what he remembered. He drew a detailed sketch of Ausso One, but wrote the word Enders on the paper along with 2 unidentified addresses. Although the addresses meant nothing, it was later discovered that another man with the last name Enders was in Medicine Bow National Forest that night.
That's weird.
It's very strange. And then there was the flattened bullet, which Carl still had in his pocket. Allegedly, metal experts from both the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization and the University of Wyoming determined that it had to have hit something harder than stone to be flattened out that way. The bullet was apparently stolen from the university safe soon after. After he was sent home from the hospital, Carl and Marjorie spoke to local newspaper reporters, and Carl also spoke to several psychologists. One of them suggested that he contact Dr. Leo Sprinkle, a fellow psychologist at the University of Wyoming, who was interested in abduction cases. Sprinkle had become interested in UFOs back in 1949 when he had his own UFO sighting. He conducted surveys of members of the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena and an initial study of people who had experienced extraterrestrial encounters. He was also a psychological consultant for the 1969 Condon Report on UFOs. Beginning in 1980, Sprinkle held an annual convention of UFO contactees. But on November 2, 1974, Dr. Sprinkle drove to Carl Higdon's house to meet with him. Carl's story slowly emerged through several sessions of hypnosis. He became convinced that the reason the aliens said that they didn't want him and dropped him back on Earth was because he had a vasectomy and wasn't useful to them because of it. For a long time after his encounter, Carl claimed that he was still telepathically linked to Ausso One. One night, Carl insisted that Marjorie and their son get in the car with him and drive 150 miles south of town. According to ThinkAnomalous.com, they drove up a dirt road to the top of the hill. 150 feet above them, a craft shaped like a, quote, large upside-down ice cream cone hovered over the car, and a terrible sulfur smell filled the air. Carl allegedly remarked that he should have gotten there earlier and that he was too late. A few nights later, Carl woke Marjorie up in the middle of the night and told her that he felt like he was in two places at once, in bed with her, but also somewhere south of the town where he was looking for a black box. The Higdons were sure that their phone was tapped. Over the years, several UFO researchers and TV shows have talked to Carl. In 1978, he was part of an episode of In Search Of. In 2022, former police officer and paranormal researcher Dave Paulides talked to Carl for his Missing 411 series. Paulides pointed out that Carl was dropped or dumped back on Earth like several of the Missing 411 cases in national parks and forests, but that Carl was one of the lucky ones because he survived. Over the years, despite being called a fraud by skeptics, Carl Higdon never changed his story. He passed every lie detector test that he was ever given. He passed away in 2022, a little over a month after Paulides' Missing 411, the UFO connection, was released.
The interview in that documentary, which we went back and rewatched because we didn't remember that Carl Higdon was even part of it. So we rewatched it the other night. And the interviews are pretty compelling. I mean, he 100% believes that that is what happened to him, and he has not changed his story, or he did not change his story.
Well, everyone said that he believed that he was telling the truth.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't making up a lie. He actually believed this. And it's a head scratcher because after seeing the documentary, it makes you wonder.
Mm-hmm.
It's rather compelling.
Right. And especially since almost 35 years exactly, it was also in October of 2019, Mark Strittmatter, who's also an elk hunter, went missing in the Medicine Bow National Forest under similar circumstances. His truck was parked in a weird place, and all of his belongings were still inside of the truck, and they have not recovered him or found him.
Yeah, there's been a few cases through that area where people have gone missing under strange circumstances.
Yes.
You know, dogs don't pick up tracks. People are found, but, well, people's bodies are found. That search and rescue has scoured hundreds of times over.
Mm-hmm. And then just when they're about to give up,
they're dumped
they find them.
On a trail.
Right in the middle sometimes of an area that was just searched.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very strange.
Well, I'll tell you what. I wouldn't mind being taken up in the spaceship and have my kidney stones removed.
They'd dump you back too. They'd do the little scan and they'd be like, nope. Yeah,
he's got a vasectomy. So I don't have to worry if I get abducted because they're just going to drop me right back off. And I'm going to come back without kidney stones.
I know. That would be great.
Yeah. You know, the best part of it? You ain't got to pay all that exorbitant price of you going into the urologist and then going in for surgery and then charging an arm and a leg.
Right.
And then having that stent and everything.
Right.
And you get a pill that fills you up for 4 days. Who could ask for more?
Well, right. I mean, all you have after that is just, you know, ridicule and people saying that you're full of it and nobody believing you. And
I'm not going to tell anyone.
Oh, well, you'd tell me, right?
Well, yeah.
Okay. I'd believe you.
Oh, I'm sure you would.
I mean, I would not be going with you, so you'd have to tell me after the fact.
Yeah, you're too old. They wouldn't want you.
Wow. They might pick me up if they're going to pick you up. They might reject both of us together, but why would they pick you and not me? Did you see how mad I just got?
It's pretty funny.
You got me all riled up.
Well, there you have it, everyone.
Did you forget what we were talking about?
No, not at all. I was just thinking, if you want to know more about tonight's stories, go ahead and check out our show notes, because there are little bits, pieces that we leave out from time to time because, well, it's too much to put into
one episode. We'd be talking at you even longer about, stuff, but
stuff nobody wants to hear but us, probably.
Could be. All right, well, I'm going to force my husband to sign off because I can tell from the look in his eyes that he's not feeling the best. So, take it away, honey.
Join us again next week for an all-new episode of Where Our Minds Wander.
See you soon. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to traveling with you again to the places where our minds wander.
If you like what you heard, please take a moment and provide us with a 5-star rating and a comment on your favorite listening platform. It really helps us move up the list and become more visible on the podcast charts so new people can find us.
And thank you all for your continued support.
See you next week for an all-new episode.